we're reading chapter 23, and then I read chapter 24 and 25 on my own, and then so when we're done with 23, we're going to skip 24 and 25 because I already read them, and then we're going to jump into 26 through 28. So our apartment flooded, and my unpacked box of books became sponges. I'm so sorry. I would literally cry. My books are like my babies. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. That sucks. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, 23. Sorry. I lost my train of thought. For the past week, not much had changed for Manon and the Blackbeaks. They still flew daily to master the wyverns and still managed to avoid outright war in the mess hall twice a day. The Yellowlegs heir tried to rile Manon whenever she could, but Manon paid her no more attention than she would a gnat buzzing about her head. All of that changed the day of the selection when the heirs and their covens chose their mounts. Sometimes her sentences don't, I can't read them right or well, and I get confused. With 3 covens plus 3 matrons, there were 42 witches crowded around the training pit in the northern fang. Handlers rushed about below the viewing platform, readying themselves. The wyverns would be brought out one by one and, using the bait beasts, would show off their qualities. Like the other witches, Manon had been sneaking by the cages every day. She still wanted Titus. Wanted was a mortal word. Titus was hers, and if it came down to it, she'd disembowel any witch who challenged her. She'd sharpened her nails this morning in anticipation of it. All of the 13 had. Claims would be settled in a civilized manner, however. The 3 matrons would draw sticks if more than one claim was made on a mount. When it came to Titus, Manon knew precisely who would vie for him. Iskra and Petra, the Yellowlegs and Blue Blood heirs. She'd seen them both watching him with hungry eyes. Had Manon gotten her way, they would have fought for him in the sparring ring. She'd even suggested that much to her grandmother, but was told they didn't need to quarrel amongst themselves any more than necessary. It would be luck of the draw. That didn't sit well with Manon, who stood along the open edge of the platform, Astrid flanking her. Her edginess only sharpened as the heavy grate lifted at the back of the pit. The bait beast was already chained to the blood-stained wall, a broken, scarred wyvern, half the size of the bull's, his wings tucked in tight. From the platform, she could see that the venomous spikes in his tail had been sawn off to keep him from defending himself against the invaluable mounts. This is really sad. This is sad. That's sad. The bait beast lowered his head as the gate groaned opened, and the first wyvern was paraded in on tight chains, held by very pale-faced men. If I start crying, don't judge me. I hate stuff like this. It makes me so sad. They darted back as soon as the beast was through, dodging that deadly tail in the grate shut behind them. Manon loosed a breath. It wasn't Titus, but one of the medium-sized bulls. 3 sentinels stepped forward to claim him, but the blue-blood matron, Cressida, held up a hand. Let us see him in action first. One of the men whistled sharply. The wyvern turned on the bait beast. Teeth and scales and claws, so fast and vicious that even Manon held her breath. Chained as he was, the bait beast didn't stand a chance and was pinned within a second. Massive jaws holding down its neck. One command, one whistle, and the wyvern would snap it. No, literally. But the man let out a lower note whistle, and the bull backed off. Another whistle, and he sat on his haunches. 2 more sentinels stepped forward, 5 in the running. Cressida held out a fistful of twigs to the contenders. It went to the blue-blood sentinel, who grinned at the others, then down at her wyvern as it was led back into the tunnel. The bait beast, bleeding from its side, heaved himself into the shadows by the wall, waiting for the next assault. They don't get new ones? It's the same one? That's so sad. One after another, the wyverns were brought out, attacking with swift, wicked force, and one by one the sentinels claimed them. No Titus, not yet. She had a feeling that matrons were drawing this out as some test, to see how well the heirs could control themselves while waiting for the best mounts, to see who would hold out longest. Manon kept one eye on the beasts and another on the other heirs, who watched her in turn as each wyvern was paraded. Yet the first truly enormous female had Petra, the blue-blood heir, stepping forward. The female was nearly Titus's size and wound up taking a chunk out of the bait beast's flank before the trainers could get her to stop. Wild, unpredictable, lethal, magnificent. No one challenged the blue-blood heir. Petra's mother only gave her a nod, as though they had already known what mount she desired. Astrid took the fiercest stealth wyvern that came along, a cunning-eyed female. Her cousin had always been the best at scouting, and after a talk with Manon and the other sentinels that went long into the night, it had been decided that Astrid would continue that role in the 13's new duties. So when the pale blue female was presented, Astrid claimed her, her eyes promising such brutality that anyone who got in her way that they practically glowed. No one dared challenge her. Manon was watching the tunnel entrance when she smelled the myrrh and rosemary scent of the blue-blood air beside her. Astrid snarled a soft warning. "Waiting for Titus, aren't you?" Petra murmured, eyes also on the tunnel. "And if I am?" Manon asked. "I'd rather you have him than Iskra." The witch's serene face was unreadable. So would I. She wasn't sure what exactly, but the conversation meant something. Clearly, seeing them quietly talking meant something to everyone else too, especially Iskra, who sauntered over to Manon's other side. "Plotting already?" The blue-blood heir lifted her chin. "I think Titus would make a good mount for Manon." A line in the sand, Manon thought. What had the blue-blood matron told Petra about her? What schemes was she hatching? Iskra's mouth twisted into a half-grin. We'll see what the three-faced mother has to say. Manon might have said something back, but then Titus thundered out. As it had every other time, the breath went out of her at his sheer size and viciousness. The men had barely scrambled back through the gate before Titus whirled, snapping for them. They'd made only a few successful runs with him, she'd been told, yet under the right rider, he'd fully break. Titus didn't wait for the whistle before he wheeled on the bait beast, striking with his barbed tail. The chained beast ducked with surprising swiftness, as if he'd sensed the bull's attack, and Titus's tail embedded itself in the stone. Debris rained on the bait beast, and as he cringed back, Titus struck again, and again. Chained to the wall, the bait beast could do nothing. Oh my god! Y'all, I don't like this. The man whistled, but Titus kept at it. Y'all, I'm crying. Hold on. Oh my god. Hold on. Ah! The man whistled, but Titus kept at it. He moved with the fluid grace of untamed savagery. The beast bait yelled. Oh my god. The bait beast, and Manon could have sworn the blue-blood heir flinched. She'd never heard a cry of pain from any of the wyverns, yet as Titus... Sorry, I don't like this! Yet as Titus sank back on his haunches, he saw where he'd struck right atop the earlier wound in the bait beast's flank, as if Titus knew where to hit, to inflict the most agony. She knew they were intelligent, but how intelligent? The man whistled again, and a whip sounded. Titus just kept pacing in front of the bait beast, contemplating how he would strike, not out of strategy. No, he wanted to savor it, to taunt. Okay, I don't like Titus. A shiver of delight went down Manon's spine, riding a beast like Titus, ripping apart her enemies with him. If you want him so badly, Iskra whispered, and Manon realized she was still standing beside her, now only a step away. Why don't you go get him? And before Manon could move, before anyone could, because they were all enthralled by the glorious beast, iron claws shoved into her back. Huh? Astrid's shout echoed, but Manon was falling, plunging the 40 feet right into the stone pit. She twisted, colliding with a small crumbling ledge jutting from the wall. It slowed her fall and saved her life, but she kept going until she slammed into the ground, her ankle wrenching. Cries came from above, but Manon didn't look up. If she had, she might have seen Astrid tackle Iskra, claws and teeth out. She might have seen her grandmother give the order that no one was to jump into the pit. But Manon wasn't looking at them. Titus turned toward her. The wyvern stood between her and the gate, where the men were rushing to and fro, as if trying to decide whether they should risk saving her or wait until she was carried on. Titus's tail lashed back and forth, his dark eyes pinned on her. Manon drew Windcleaver. It was a dagger compared to the mass of him. She had to get to that gate. She stared him down. Titus settled onto his haunches, preparing to attack. He knew where the gate was too, and what it meant for her. His prey. No rider or mistress, but prey. The witches had gone silent. The men at the gate and upper platforms had gone silent. Manon rotated her sword. Titus lunged. She had to roll to avoid his mouth, and was up in a second, sprinting like hell for that gate. Her ankle throbbed, and she limped, swallowing her scream of pain. Titus turned, fast as a spring streamed down a mountainside, and as she hurtled for the gate, he struck with his tail. Manon had enough sense to whirl to avoid the venomous barbs, but she caught an upper edge of the tail in the side and went flying, Windcleaver wrenching from her grip. She hit the dirt near the opposite wall and slid, face scraping on the rocks. Her ribs bleeded in agony as she scrambled into a sitting position and gauged the distance between herself and the sword and Titus. But Titus was hesitating, his eyes lifted behind her, above her, to darkness embrace her. She'd forgotten about the bait beast, the creature chained behind her, so close she could smell the carrion on his breath. Titus's stare was a command for the bait beast to stand down, to let him eat Manon. Manon dared a glance over her shoulder, to the sword in the shadows, so close to the chained anchor of the bait beast. She might have risked it if the beast wasn't there, if he wasn't looking dead at her, looking at her like she was not prey. Because he knows what it feels like. Y'all! Oh my god! Not me crying over this fictional dragon. Titus growled a territorial warning at the bait beast again, so loud she could feel it in every bone. Instead, the bait beast, small as he was gazing at her with something like rage and determination. Emotion, she might have called it. Hunger. But not for her. No, she realized as the bait beast lifted its black gaze to Titus, letting out a low snarl in response. Not submissive in the least, that sound. A threat. A promise. The bait beast wanted a shot at Titus. Allies, if only for this moment. Again, Manon felt that ebb and flow in the world, that invisible current that some called fate and some called the loom of the three-faced goddess. Titus roared his final threat. Manon twisted to her feet and ran. Every step made stars flash, and the ground shook as Titus barreled after her, willing to tear through the bait beast to kill her if necessary. Manon scooped up her sword and whirled, bringing it down upon the thick, rusted chain with every bit of strength left in her. Windcleaver, they called her blade. Now they would call it Ironcleaver. The chain snapped free as Titus leapt for her. Titus didn't see it coming, and there was nothing like shock in his eyes as the bait beast tackled him and they rolled. Titus was twice its size and uninjured, and Manon didn't wait to see the outcome before she took off for the tunnel, where the men were frantically lifting the grate. But then a boom and a shocked murmur sounded, and Manon dared one look in time to see the wyverns leap apart and the bait beast strike again. The blow from that scarred, useless tail was so strong Titus's head slammed into the dirt. As Titus surged to his legs, the bait beast feigned with its tail and made a swipe with jagged claws that had Titus roaring in pain. Manon froze, barely 15 feet from the gate. The wyverns circled around each other, wings scraping against the ground. It should have been a joke, and yet the bait beast wouldn't stand down despite the limp, despite the scars and the blood. Titus went right for the throat with no warning growl. The bait beast's tail connected with Titus's head. Titus reeled back but then lunged, jaws and tail snapping. Once those barbs got into the flesh of the bait beast, it would be done. The bait beast dodged the tail by slamming its own down atop it, but couldn't escape the jaws that latched onto its neck. Over. It should be over. The bait beast thrashed, but couldn't get free. Manon knew she should run. Others were shouting. She had been born without sympathy or mercy or kindness. She didn't care which one of them lived or died as long as she escaped. But that current was still flowing toward the fight, not away from it, and she owed the bait beast a life debt. So Manon did the most foolish thing she'd ever done in her long, wicked life. Yo, oh my god! She ran for Titus and brought Windcleaver down upon its tail. She severed clean through flesh and bone, and Titus roared, releasing his prey. The stump of his tail lashed at her, and Manon took it right in the stomach, the air knocked out of her before she even hit the ground. When she raised herself, she saw the final lunge that ended it. Throat exposed by his bellow of pain, Titus didn't stand a chance as the bait beast pounced and closed its jaws around that mighty neck. Titus had one last thrash, one final attempt to pry himself free. The bait beast held firm, as though he'd been waiting for weeks or months or years. He clamped down and wrenched his head away, taking Titus's throat with him. Y'all. What did I just read? Silence fell, as if the world itself stopped when Titus's body crashed to the ground, black blood spilling everywhere. Manon stood absolutely still. Slowly, the bait beast lifted its head from the carcass, Titus's blood dripping from its maw. Their eyes met. People were shouting at her to run, and the gate groaned open, but Manon stared into those black eyes, one of them horribly scarred but intact. He took a step, then another toward her. Manon held her ground. It was impossible. Impossible. Titus was twice his size, twice his weight, and had years of training. The bait beast had trounced him, not because he was bigger or stronger, but because he wanted it more. Titus had been a brute and a killer, yet this wyvern before her, he was a warrior. Men were rushing in with spears and swords and whips, and the bait beast growled. Manon held up a hand, and again the world stopped. Manon, eyes still upon the beast, said, "He's mine." He had saved her life, not by coincidence, but by choice. He'd felt the current running between them, too. "What?" her grandmother barked from above. Manon found herself walking toward the wyvern, and stopped with not 5 feet between them. "He's mine," Manon said, taking in the scars. Stop. Stop. Taking in the scars, the limp, the burning life in those eyes. The witch and the wyvern looked at each other for a moment that lasted for a heartbeat, that lasted for eternity. "You're mine," Manon said to him. The wyvern blinked at her, Titus's blood still dripping from his cracked and broken teeth, and Manon had the feeling that he had come to the same decision. Perhaps he had known long before tonight, and his fight with Titus hadn't been so much about survival as it had been a challenge to claim her. As his rider, as his mistress, as his... Why am I crying over this right now? Why am I crying over this right now? I didn't expect to cry today, y'all. I really didn't. But that did it. I think I'm gonna start my period soon. I should not have gotten so emotional over this. Oh my god. He's such a good... Stop. Anyways, continuing on. Manon named her wyvern Abraxas, after the ancient serpent who held the world between his coils at the behest of the three-faced goddess. And that was about the only pleasant thing that happened that night. When she'd returned to the others, Abraxas taken away for cleaning and mending, and Titus's carcass hauled off by 30 men, Manon had stared down each and every witch who dared meet her eyes. The Yellowleg's heir was being held by Astrid in front of the matrons. Manon gazed at Iskra for a long moment before she simply said, "Looks like I lost my footing." Iskra steamed at the ears, but Manon shrugged, wiping the dirt and blood from her face before limping back to the Omega. She wouldn't give Iskra the satisfaction of claiming she'd almost killed her, and Manon was in no shape to settle this in a proper fight. Attack or clumsiness, Astrid was punished by Mother Blackbeak that night for letting the heir fall into the pit. Manon had asked to be the one to dispense the whipping, but her grandmother ignored her. Instead, she had the Yellowleg's heir do it. As Astrid's failure had occurred in plain sight of the other matrons and their heirs, so would her punishment. Standing in the mess hall, Manon watched each brutal lash, all 10 of them at full strength, as Iskra sported a bruise on her jaw, courtesy of Astrid. To her everlasting credit, Astrid didn't scream, not once. It still took all of Manon's self-restraint to keep from grabbing the whip and using it to strangle Iskra. Then came the conversation with her grandmother. It wasn't so much a conversation as it was a slap in the face, then a verbal beating that, a day later, still made Manon's ears ring. She'd humiliated her grandmother and every Blackbeak in history by picking that runty scrap of meat, regardless of his victory. It was a fluke that he'd killed Titus, her grandmother ranted. Abraxas was the smallest of any of the mounts, and on top of that, because of his size, he had never flown a day in his life. They had never let him out of the warrens. They didn't even know if he could fly after his wings had taken a beating for so long, and the handlers were of the opinion that should Abraxas attempt the crossing, he'd splatter himself and Manon on the gap floor. They claimed no other wyverns would ever accept his dominance, not as a wing leader. Manon had ruined all of her grandmother's plans. All these facts were shouted at her again and again. She knew that even if she wanted to change mounts, her grandmother would force her to keep Abraxas, just to humiliate her when she failed, even if it got her killed in the process. Her grandmother hadn't been in the pit, though. She hadn't looked into Abraxas's eyes and seen the warrior's heart beating in him. She had noticed that he'd fought with more cunning and ferocity than any of the others. So Manon held firm and took the slap to the face and the lecture, and the second slap that left her cheek throbbing. Manon's face was still aching when she reached the pen in which Abraxas now made his home. He was curled by the far wall, silent and still when so many of the creatures were pacing, or shrieking, or growling. Her escort, the overseer, peered through the bars. Astrid lurked in the shadows. After the whipping last night, her second wasn't going to let her out of her sight any time soon. Manon hadn't apologized for the whipping. The rules were the rules, and her cousin had failed. Astrid deserved the lashing, just as Manon deserved the bruise in her cheek. "Why is he curled up like that?" Manon asked the man. "Suspect it's because he's never had a pen to himself. Not this big, anyway." Manon studied the penned-in cavern. "Where did they keep him before?" The man pointed at the floor. "With the other baiters in the sty. He's the oldest of the baiters, you know. Survived the pits and the styes. But that doesn't mean he's suitable for you. If I wanted your opinion on his suitability, I'd ask for it," Manon said, eyes still on Abraxas as she approached the bars. "How long to get him in the skies?" The man rubbed his head. "Could be days, or weeks, or months. Could be never." "We begin training with our mounts this afternoon." "Not going to happen." Manon raised her eyebrows. "This one needs to be trained alone first. I'll get our best trainers on it, and you can use other wyvern in the meantime to—" "First of all, human," Manon interrupted, "don't give me orders." Her iron teeth snapped out and he flinched. "Second, I won't be training with another wyvern. I'll train with him." The man was pale as death as he said, "All your sentinels, mounts, will attack him. And the stand us?" "No." Some spoken commands and whistles, but no more than a dog. Manon didn't believe that for one moment. It wasn't that he was lying to her. He just didn't know any better. Or maybe Abraxas was different. She'd use every moment until the war games to train him. When she and her 13 were crowned victors, she'd make each and every one of the witches who doubted her grandmother included, curse themselves for fools. Because she was Manon Blackbeak, and she'd never failed at anything, and there would be nothing better than watching Abraxas bite off Iskra's head on the battlefield. Okay, so I read 24. Y'all, hold on. We have to talk about 24 because like I don't know. I feel like Dorian is entering his villain era. I feel like Dorian is entering his villain era. He's just been lied to one too many times. Basically what happened in 24 was Kale brought Adian into the tomb where the queen was being kept and was talking about Selena, Aelin, And Dorian overheard, and now he knows that Selena is Aelin, and he's mad that he had that secret kept from him. And he almost froze Chaol to death. So I think that Dorian is entering his villain era, and you know what? I'm here for it. I will support my man, no matter what. No matter what. I don't care. I'll support him through anything. If he wants to be a villain, he can be the villain. And I'll be... If there's one Dorian fan, it's me. If there's a million, I'm the biggest one. Yeah. I'm standing by that man no matter what. No matter what. Nothing he can do that could shake me. Oh, is it freezing for y'all? Is it better now? I think so. It's green. So can't blame Dorian for anything. Nope. He has no fault in anything. In anything. He is innocent in all cases and in all circumstances and situations. That's all I'm gonna say. Anyway, chapter 26. Chaol hadn't seen or heard from the general or the prince since that night in the tomb. According to his men, the prince was spending his time in the healer's catacombs, courting one of the young women down there. He hated himself. Some part of him was relieved to hear it. At least Dorian was talking to someone. The rift with Dorian was worth it. For Dorian, even if his friend never forgave him. For Selena, even if she never came back. Even if he wished she were still Selena and not Aelin. It was worth it. It was a week before he had time to meet with Aedion again, to get the information that he hadn't received thanks to Dorian interrupting them. If Dorian had snuck up on them so easily, then the tomb wasn't the best place to meet. There was one place, however, where they could gather with minimal risk. Selena had left it to him in her will, along with the address. I forgot she left him the apartment. I forgot she... Look, and there I go. I'm about to cry again. Y'all, I swear I'm about to start my period. I am crying so much. I forgot she left him the apartment where her and Sam lived together. And, yeah. The secret apartment above the warehouse was untouched, though someone had taken the time to cover the ornate furniture. Pulling the sheets off one by one was like uncovering a bit more of who Selena had been before Endovier. Proof that her lavish tastes ran deep. She'd bought this place, she'd once told him, to have somewhere to call her own, a place outside the Assassin's Keep where she'd been raised. She dropped every last copper she had into it, but it had been necessary, she said, for the bit of freedom it granted her. He could have left the sheets on. Probably should have, but he was curious. The apartment consisted of 2 bedrooms, with their own bathing rooms, a kitchen, and a great room with which a deep cushioned couch sprawled before a carved marble place. I'm sorry, I can't see. I have tears in my eyes, I can't see. I'm getting transported back to Selena coming home after searching for Sam all night and finding Arabin sitting on her couch when she thought it was Sam. Accented by 2 oversized velvet armchairs. The other half of the room was occupied by an oak dining table capable of seating 8, its place setting still laid out, plates of porcelain and silver, flatware that had long since gone dull. It was the only evidence that this apartment had been untouched since whoever, Arabin Hamel probably, had ordered the place sealed up. Arabin Hamel, the king of assassins. Chaol gritted his teeth as he finished stuffing the last of the white sheets into the hallway closet. He'd been thinking a good deal about Selena's old master in the past few days. Arabin was smart enough to have put things together when he found a washed-up orphan right after the Princess of Terrasen went missing. Her body vanished into the half-frozen Florine River. If Arabin had known and done those things to her, the scar on Selena's wrist flashed before him. He'd made her break her own hand. There must have been countless other brutalities that Selena didn't even tell him about. And the worst of them, the absolute worst. He'd never asked Selena why. When she was appointed champion, her first priority wasn't hunting down her master and cutting him into pieces for what he... What was the last thing y'all heard? Let me try to drink water with the lid on. Pieces? Pieces was the last thing y'all heard? Wait, what? Why she didn't track Arabin down? Oh, okay. Okay, I'll just start from that paragraph, the beginning of that paragraph, and we'll go from there. If Arabin had known and done those things to her... Wait, right? Oh yeah, I'll just start from there. The scar on Selena's wrist flashed before him. He'd made her break her own hand. There must have been countless other brutalities that Selena didn't even tell him about. And the worst of them, the absolute worst, he'd never asked Selena why. When she was appointed champion, her first priority wasn't hunting down her master and cutting him into pieces for what he'd done to her. God, I'm gonna be crying, y'all. I'm sorry. For what he'd done to her lover, Sam... I can't even say his name. Sam Cortland. Arabin had ordered Sam tortured and killed, and then devised a trap for Selena that got her hauled off to Endovier. Arabin must have expected to retrieve her someday. If he'd left this apartment untouched, he must have wanted to let her rot in Endovier. Until he decided to free her and she crawled back to him, his eternally loyal servant. Okay. It was her right, Cale told himself. Her right to decide when and how to kill Arabin. It wasn't Adian's right. Or it was Adian's right too, even if the two lords of Terrasen had more of a claim on Arabin's head than he did. But if Cale ever saw him, he wasn't sure he would be able to restrain himself. The rickety wooden staircase beyond the front door groaned, and Cale had, oh my god, no, no, no. And Cale had his sword drawn in a heartbeat. Then there was a low, two-note whistle, and he relaxed. Oh, just slightly, and whistled back, but kept his sword drawn until Adian strode through the door, sword out. I was wondering whether you'd be here alone or with a gaggle of men waiting in the shadows, Adian said by way of greeting, sheathing his sword. Cale glared at him. Likewise. Adian moved farther into the apartment, the fierceness on his face shifting among wariness, wonder and sorrow, and it occurred to Cale that this apartment was the first time Adian was seeing a piece of his lost cousin. These were her things. She had selected everything, from the figurines atop the mantel to the green napkins to the old farm table in the kitchen, flecked and marred by what seemed like countless knives. Adian paused in the center of the room, scanning everything, perhaps to see if there were indeed any hidden forces lying in wait. But Cale muttered something about using the bathing room and gave Adian the privacy he needed. This was her apartment. Whether she accepted or hated her past, she decorated the dining table in Terrasen's royal colors, green and silver. The table and the stag figurine atop the mantel were the only shreds of proof that she might remember, might care. Everything else was comfortable, tasteful, as if the apartment were for lounging and nights by the fire. And there were so many books, on shelves, on the tables by the couch, stacked beside the large armchair before the curtained floor-to-ceiling window spanning the entire length of the great room. Smart, educated, cultured, if the knickknacks were any indication. There were things from across the kingdoms, as if she'd picked up something everywhere she went. The room was a map of her adventures, a map of a whole different person. Aelin had lived. She'd lived and seen and done things. The kitchen was small but cozy, and God, she had a cooling box. The captain had mentioned her being notorious as an assassin, but he hadn't mentioned that she was rich. All that blood money, all these things, just proof of what she'd lost, what he'd failed to protect. She'd become a killer. A damn good one, if this apartment was any indication. Her bedroom was even more outrageous. It had a massive 4-poster bed with a mattress that looked like a cloud and an attached marble tiled bathing room that possessed its own plumbing system. While her closet hadn't changed, his cousin had always loved pretty clothes. Adian pulled out a deep blue tunic, gold embroidery around the labels and buttons glimmering in the light from the sconces. These were clothes for a woman's body, and the sense still clinging to the entire apartment belonged to a woman, so similar to what he remembered from childhood, but wrapped in mystery and secret smiles. It was impossible for his face senses not to notice, to react. Adian leaned against the wall of the dressing room, staring at the gowns and the displays of jewelry, now coated in dust. He didn't let himself care about what had been done to him in the past. The people he'd ruined, the battlefields he'd walked off covered in blood and gore that wasn't his own. As far as he was concerned, he'd lost everything the day Aylin died. He had deserved the punishment for how badly he'd failed. But Aylin... Adian ran his hands through his hair before stepping into the great room. Aylin would come back from Wendelin, no matter what the captain believed. Aylin would come back, and when she did, with every breath, Adian felt that lingering scent wrapping tighter around his heart and soul. When she came back, he was never letting her go. Adian sank onto one of the armchairs before the fire, as Kale said, "Well, I think I've waited long enough to hear what you have to say about magic. I hope it's worthwhile. Regardless of what I know, magic shouldn't be your main plan of defense or action. I saw your queen cleave the earth in two with her power," Kale said. "Tell me that wouldn't turn the tide on a battlefield. Tell me that you wouldn't need that, and others like her." "She won't be anywhere near those battlefields," Adian snarled softly. Kale highly doubted that was true, but wished it was. Adian would probably have to bind Selena to her throne to keep her from fighting on the front lines with her people. "Just tell me." Adian sighed and gazed at the fire. Adian sighed and gazed at the fire, as if beholding a distant horizon. The burnings and executions had already started by the time magic disappeared, so the day it happened, I thought the birds were just fleeing the soldiers or looking for carrion. Carrion? I still don't know how to say that. I feel like I'm saying it wrong. I was locked in one of the tower rooms by the king's order. Most days I didn't dare look out the window because I didn't want to see what was happening in the city below, and there was such noise from the birds that day that I looked, and Adian shook his head. Something sent them all flying up in one direction, then another, and then the screaming started. I heard some people just died right on the spot, as if an artery had been cut. Adian spread out a map on the low table between them and put a calloused finger on Orinth. There were 2 waves of birds. The first went north-northwest. He traced a vague line. From the tower, I could see far enough that I knew many of them had come from the south. Most of the birds near us didn't move much, but then the second wave shoved all of them to the north and east, like something from the center of the land threw them that way. Kale pointed to Parenth, the second largest city in Terrasen. "From here?" "Farther south." Adian knocked Kale's hand out of the way. "Endivir, or even lower." "You couldn't have seen that far." "No, but the warrior lords of my court made me memorize the birds in Oakwald and all their calls for hunting and fighting. And there were birds flying up toward us that were only found in your country. I was counting them to distract myself while..." Another pause, as if Adian hadn't meant to say that. "I don't remember hearing any birds from the 3 southern kingdoms." Kale made a rough line, starting in Rifthold and going out toward the mountains, toward the Farian Gap. Like something shot out in this direction. It wasn't until the second wave that the magic stopped. Adian raised a brow. "Don't you remember that day?" "I was here. If anyone felt pain, they hid it. Magic's been illegal in Ardalan for decades, so where does all this get us, Adian?" "Well, Murtaugh and Rain had similar experiences." So then the general launched into another tale. Like Adian, Ren, and Murtaugh had experienced the frenzy of local animals in twin waves of something the day magic had disappeared. but they'd been in the southern part of their continent, having just arrived in Skulls Bay. It wasn't until 6 months ago, when they'd been lured into the city by Archer Finn's lies about Aylin's re-emergence, that they'd started considering magic, contemplating ways to break the king's power for their queen. After comparing notes with the other rebels in Rifthold, they'd realized that others had experienced similar phenomena. Wanting to get a full account, they'd found a merchant from the deserted peninsula who was willing to talk, a man from Xandria who was surprisingly honest despite the business he'd built on contraband items. I stole an Asterian mare from the Lord of Xandria. Of course, Selena had been to the deserted peninsula and sought out trouble. Despite the ache in his chest, Cale smiled at the memory of Adian recalled Murtaugh's report of the merchant's account. Not 2 waves when magic vanished in the desert, but 3. The first swept down from the north. The merchant had been with the Lord of Xandria in his fortress high above the city and had seen a faint tremor that made the red sand dance. The second came from the southwest, barreling right toward them like a sandstorm. The final pulse came from the same inland source Adian remembered. Seconds later, magic was gone, and people were screaming in the streets, and the Lord of Xandria got the order, a week later, to put down all the known or registered magic wielders in his city. Then the screaming had become different. Adian gave him a sly grin as he finished, but Murtaugh figured out more. We're meeting in 3 days. He can tell you his theories then. Cale started from his chair. That's it? That's all you know? What you've been lording over me for the past few weeks? There's still more for you to tell me, so why should I tell you everything? I've told you vital, world-changing information, Cale said through his teeth. You've just told me stories. Adian's eyes took on a lethal glint. You'll want to hear what Wren and Murtaugh have to say. Cale didn't feel like waiting so long to hear it, but there were 2 state lunches and 1 formal dinner before then, and he was expected to attend all of them, and present the king with his defense plans for all the events as well. After a moment, Adian said, How do you stand working for him? How do you pretend you don't know what that bastard is doing? What he's done to innocent people, to the woman you claim to love? I'm doing what I have to do. He didn't think Adian would understand anyway. Tell me why the captain of the guard, a lord of Ardalan, is helping his enemy. That's all the information I want from you today. Cale wanted to say that, given how much he'd already told him, he didn't have to offer a damn thing. Instead, he said, I grew up being told we were bringing peace and civilization to the continent. What I've seen recently has made me realize how much of it is a lie. You knew about the labor camps, though. About the massacres. It's easy to be lied to when you do not know any of those people firsthand. But Selena with her scars, and Nehemiah with her people butchered. It's easy to believe when your king tells you that the people in Endivir deserve to be there because they're criminals or rebels who tried to slaughter innocent Ardalanian families. How many of your countrymen would stand against your king if they too learned the truth? If they stopped to consider what it would be like if it were their family, their village, being enslaved or murdered? How many would stand if they knew what power their prince possessed, if their prince rose up to fight with us? Cale didn't know, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. As for Dorian, he could not ask that of his friend, could not expect it. His goal was keeping Dorian safe, even if it would cost him their friendship. He didn't want Dorian involved, ever. The past week had been terrifying and wonderful for Dorian. We're back to Dorian. Oh, thank God. I hope it's him and Sorstra, because I need my break. I need a break. Terrifying because 2 more people knew his secret, and because he walked such a fine line when it came to controlling his magic, which seemed more volatile with each passing day. Sorry. Wonderful, because every afternoon he visited the forgotten workroom Sorscha had discovered tucked in a lower level of the catacombs, where no one would find them. She brought books from the gods knew where, herbs and plants and salts and powders, and every day they researched and trained and pondered. There weren't many books about dampening a power like his. Many had been burned, she told him, but she looked at the magic like a disease, as if she could find the right channels to block. she could keep it contained. And if not, she always said, they could resort to drugging him just enough to even out his moods. She didn't like the idea of it, and neither did he, though it was a comfort to know the option was there. An hour each day was all they could manage together. For that hour, regardless of the laws they were breaking, Dorian felt like himself again, not twisted and reeling and stumbling through the dark, but grounded, calm. No matter what he told Sorscha, she never judged or betrayed him. Cale had been that person once, yet now, when it came to his magic, he could still see fear and a hint of disgust in Cale's eyes. "Did you know," Sorscha said from her spot across the work table, "that before magic vanished, they had to find special ways of subduing gifted prisoners?" Dorian looked up from his book, a useless tome on garden remedies. Before magic vanished, at the hand of his father and his word keys, his stomach turned. Because they'd used their magic to break out of prison. Sorscha studied the book again. "That's why a lot of the old prisons use solid iron. It's immune to magic." "I know," he said, and she raised a brow. She was slowly starting to come alive around him, though he'd also learned to read her subtle expressions better. "Back when my power first appeared, I tried using it on an iron door, and it didn't go well." Sorscha chewed on her lip. It was surprisingly distracting. "But iron's in your blood, so how does that work?" "I think it was the gods' way of keeping us from growing too powerful. If we keep contact with the magic, if it's flowing through us for too long, we faint, or worse. I wonder what would happen if we increased the iron in your diet. Perhaps adding a large amount of treacle to your food? Treacle? I don't know. We give it to anemic patients, but if we gave you a highly concentrated dose, it would taste awful and could be dangerous, but perhaps if it's in my body, then when the magic rises up," he grimaced. He might have balked at the memory of the agony when he tried to seal that iron door, but he couldn't bring himself to say no to her. "Do you have any here? Just something to add to a drink." She didn't. But she got some, and within a quarter of an hour, Dorian said a prayer to Silba and swallowed it, cringing at the obscene sweetness. Nothing. Sorscha's eyes darted from his own to the pocket watch in her hand, counting, waiting to see if there was an adverse reaction. A minute passed, and then 10. Dorian had to go soon, and so did she, but after a while, Sorscha said quietly, "Try it. Try summoning it. The iron should be in your blood now." He shut his eyes, and she added, "It reacts when you're upset, angry, or scared, or sad. Think about something that makes you feel that way." She was risking her position, her life, everything for him, the son of the man who had ordered his army to destroy her village, then slaughter her family with the other unwanted immigrants squatting in Rifthold. He didn't deserve it. He breathed in, out. She also didn't deserve the world of trouble he was bringing down upon her, or would continue to bring to her door every time he came here. He knew when women liked him, and he'd known from the first moment he'd seen her that she found him attractive. He'd hoped that opinion hadn't changed for the worse, but now, think of what upsets you. Everything upset him. It upset him that she was risking her life, that he had no choice but to endanger her, even if he took that final step toward her, even if he took her into his bed like he so badly wanted to. He was still the crown prince. "You will always be my enemy," Selena had once said. There was no escaping his crown, or his father, who would behead Sorscha, burn her, and scatter her ashes to the wind if he found out she'd helped him. His father, whom his friends were now working to destroy. They had lied to him and ignored him for that cause, because he was a danger to them, to Sorscha, and roaring pain surged from his core and up his throat, and he gagged. There was another wave, and a cool breeze tried to kiss his face, but it vanished like mist under the sun as the pain trembled through him. He leaned forward, squeezing his eyes shut as the agony and then the nausea went through him again and again. But then it was quiet. Dorian opened his eyes to find Sorscha, clever, steady, wonderful Sorscha, standing there, biting her lip. She took one step toward him, not away for once. Did it? Dorian was on his feet so fast the chair rocked behind him and had her face between his hands. A heartbeat after. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh no. Is he gonna kiss her? Is he gonna kiss her? Oh my god, is he gonna kiss her? No, stop. He can't kiss her. It's not gonna happen. He can't kiss her. He's not gonna kiss her. Is he gonna kiss her? Yes, he breathed. And he... Oh my god, he did! And he kissed her! He kissed her. It was fast, but her face was flushed and her eyes wide as he pulled back. His own eyes were wide. Gods be damned. And he was still rubbing his thumb against her soft cheek, still contemplating going back for more because that hadn't been nearly enough. She pulled away, returning to her work, as if it hadn't been anything other than an embarrassment. Tomorrow? She murmured. She wouldn't look at him. He could hardly muster the words to tell her yes as he staggered out. She looked so surprised, and if he didn't get out, he was likely to kiss her again. But maybe she didn't want to be kissed. This bitch. She is so... Girl, get over yourself. Kiss him back. Chapter 27. Standing atop a viewing platform on the side of the Omega, Manon watched the first Yellowlegs coven of the day take the crossing. The plunge down followed by the violent sweep up was stunning, even when it was the Yellowlegs' riders astride the wind. Leading them along the sheer face of the northern fang was Iskra. Her bull, a massive beat named Fendir, was a force of nature in himself. Though smaller than Titus, he was twice as nasty. They suit each other, Astrid said from beside Manon. The rest of the 13 were in the sparring room, instructing the other covens in hand-to-hand combat. Feline and Fallon, the green-eyed demon twins, were undoubtedly taking some pleasure from torturing the new sentinels. They thrived on that sort of thing. Iskra and Fendir swept over the uppermost peak of the northern fang and vanished into the clouds, the other 12 riders trailing in tight formation. Ugh! The cold wind whipped at Manon's face, beckoning to her. She was on her way to the caverns to see Abraxas, but she'd wanted to monitor the Yellowlegs crossing first, just to make sure they were truly gone for the next 3 hours. She looked across the span of the bridge to the fang and its giant entryway. Screeching and roaring echoed from it, reverberating across the mountains. I want you to keep the 13 occupied for the rest of the day, Manon said. As second, Astrid was the only one of the 13 with any sort of right to question her, and even then it was only in very limited circumstances. You're going to train with him? Manon nodded. Your grandmother said she'd gut me if I let you get out of my sight again. Golden hair twining about her in the wind, Astrid's face, with its now crooked nose, was wary. You're going to have to decide, Manon said, not bothering to bare her iron teeth. Are you her spy or my second? No hint of pain or fear or betrayal, just a slight narrowing of her eyes. And I serve you. She's your matron. I serve you. For a heartbeat, Manon Okay, I ship them. I just found out who I want Manon to be with. And it's her. It's Astrid. I want them together. Yeah. I just made up my mind about that right now, and I will accept no one else. For a heartbeat, Manon wondered when she'd ever earned that kind of loyalty. They weren't friends, at least not in the way that humans seem to be friends. Every Blackbeak already owed her their loyalty and obedience as the heir. But this... Manon had never explained herself, her plans, or her intentions to anyone except her grandmother. But she found herself saying to her second, I'm still going to be wing leader. Astrid smiled, her iron teeth like quicksilver in the morning sun. We know. Manon lifted her chin. I want the 13 adding tumbling to their hand-to-hand training, and when you can handle your wyvern on your own, I want you in the skies when the Yellowlegs are aloft. I want to know where they fly, how they fly, and what they do. Astrid nodded. Oh, they're cousins? I forgot they were cousins. Never mind. No, I forgot they were cousins. I didn't think about that before I said it, okay? They just had a moment and I was like, but no, they're cousins, so no. No incest in this house. No! Rowan and Aelin are still not okay, and Manon and Astrid are not okay. Y'all stop. Stop! No. 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 The first cousins. Oh my god! Nothing being first cousins. No. No. Y'all stop. Whoopsies. It's okay, everybody makes mistakes. It was a slip up. Anyway, moving on. Astra nodded. I already have the shadows watching the yellow legs in the halls, she said, a glimmer of rage and bloodthirst in those gold-flecked black eyes. When Manon raised a brow, Astrid said, "You didn't think I'd let Iskra off that easily, did you?" Fuck, I lost my spot. Oh, there it is. Manon could still feel the iron-tipped fingers digging into her back, shoving her into the pit. Y'all. Stop it. Now that I know they're cousins, now that I'm aware, they're not good. Don't read up. Okay. Her ankle was sore and stiff from the fall, her ribs bruised from the beating she'd taken from Titus's tail. Keep them in line, unless you want your nose broken a second time. Astrid flashed a grin. We don't move without your command, lady. Manon didn't want the overseer in the pen, or his 3 handlers all bearing spears and whips. She didn't want any of them for 3 reasons. The first was that she wanted to be alone with Abraxas, who was crouched against the back wall, waiting and watching. The second was that the human smell of them, the beckoning warmth of the blood pulsing in their necks, was distracting. The stench of their fear was distracting. She debated for a good minute whether it would be worth it to gut one of them just to see what the others would do. Already, men were going missing from the Fang, men who were rumored to have crossed the bridge to the Omega and never returned. Manon hadn't killed any of the men here yet, but every minute alone with them tempted her to play. And the third reason she resented their presence was that Abraxas loathed them, I can't say that word, with their whips and spears and chains and their hulking presence. The wyvern wouldn't move from his spot against the wall, no matter how viciously they cracked their whips. He hated whips, not just feared, but actually hated. The sound alone made him cringe and bare his teeth. They'd been in the pen for 10 minutes, attempting to get close enough to get him chained down and saddled. If it didn't happen soon, she'd have to go back to the Omega before the Yellow Legs returned. He's never taken a saddle, the overseer said to her. Probably won't. She heard the unspoken words. I'm not going to risk my men getting it on him. You're just being proud. Pick another mount like a good girl. Manon flashed her iron teeth at the overseer, her upper lip pulling back just enough to warn him. He backed up a step, whip drooping Abraxas's mutilated tail slashed across the ground, his eyes never leaving the 3 men trying to force him into submission. One of them cracked the whip, so close to Abraxas that he flinched away. Another snapped it near his tail, twice. Then Abraxas lunged, with both neck and tail. The 3 handlers scrambled, barely out of reach of his snapping teeth. Enough. Your men have cowards' hearts, she said, giving the overseer a withering look as she stalked across the dirt floor. The overseer grabbed for her, but she slashed him with iron-tipped fingers and sliced his hand open. He cursed, but Manon kept walking, licking his blood off her nails. She almost spat it out. Vile. The blood tasted rotten, as if it had curdled or festered inside a corpse for days. She glanced at the blood on the rest of her hand. It was too dark for human blood. If witches had indeed been killing these men, why had no one reported this? She bit down on the questions. She wouldn't think about it another time. Maybe drag the overseer into a forgotten corner and open him up to see what was decaying inside him. Well, they're being controlled by magic. By those rings, right? But right now, the man had gone quiet. Each step brought her closer to Abraxas. A line had been marked in the dirt where the safety of the chains ended. Manon took 3 steps beyond it, one for each face of their goddess, maiden, mother, crone. Abraxas crouched, the powerful muscles in his body tense, ready to spring. "You know who I am," Manon said, gazing into those endless black eyes, not giving 1 inch to fear or doubt. "I am Manon Blackbeak, heir to the Blackbeak clan, and you are mine. Do you understand?" One of the men snorted, but Manon might have whirled to tear out his tongue right there, but Abraxas lowered his head ever so slightly, as if he understood. "You are Abraxas," Manon said to him, a chill slithering down her neck. "I gave you that name because he is the great beast, the serpent who wrapped the world in his coils, and who will devour it at the very end when the 3-faced goddess bids him to." "You are Abraxas," she repeated, "and you are mine." A blink, then another. Abraxas took a step toward her. Leather groaned as someone tightened their grip on a coiled whip, but Manon held fast, lifting one hand toward the wyvern. Abraxas. The mighty head came toward her, those eyes pools of liquid night meeting her own. Her hand was still extended, tipped in iron and stained with blood. He pressed his snout to her palm and huffed. His gray hide was warm and surprisingly soft, thick but supple, like worn leather. Up close, the variation of coloring was striking. Not just gray, but dark green, brown, black. It was marred all over by thick scars, so many that they could have been the stripes of a jungle cat. Abraxas's teeth, yellow and cracked, gleamed in the torchlight. Some were missing, but those that remained were as long as a finger and twice as thick. His hot breath reeked, either from his diet or rotting teeth. Each of the scars, the chipped teeth and broken claws, the mutilated tail, they weren't the markings of a victim. Oh no, they were the trophies of a survivor. Abraxas was a warrior who had had all the odds stacked against him and survived, learned from it, triumphed. Manon didn't bother to look at the man behind her as she said, "Get out." She kept staring into those dark eyes. "Leave the saddle and get out. If you bring a whip in here again, I'll use it on you myself." But now, muttering and clicking their tongues, the handlers shuffled out and shut the gate. When they were alone, Manon stroked the massive snout. However, the king had bred these beasts. Abraxas had somehow been born different. Smaller, but smarter. Or perhaps the others didn't ever need to think. Cared for and trained, they did what they were told. But Abraxas had learned to survive, and perhaps that had opened his mind. He could understand her words, her expressions, and if he could comprehend those things, he could possibly teach the other mounts of the 13. It was a small edge, but an edge that could make them wing leader, and make them invincible against the king's enemies. "I'm going to put this saddle on you," she said, still cupping that snout. He shifted, but Manon grabbed on tight, forcing him to look at her. "You want out of this shithole? Then you'll let me put this saddle on you to check the fit. And when we're done, you're going to let me look at your tail. Those human bastards cut off your spikes, so I'm going to build some for you. Iron ones, like mine," she said, and flashed her iron nails for him to see. "And fangs, too," she added, baring her iron teeth. "It's going to hurt, and you're going to want to kill the men who put them in, but you're going to let them do it, because if you don't, then you will rot down here for the rest of your life. Understand?" A long, hot huff of air into her hands. "Once all that is done," she said, smiling faintly at the wyvern, "you and I are going to learn how to fly, and then we'll stain this kingdom red. Abraxas did everything she asked, though he growled at the handlers who inspected and poked and prodded, and nearly bit off the arm of the physician who had to dig out his rotted teeth to make way for the iron fangs. It took 5 days to do it all. He almost took out a wall when they welded the iron spikes into his tail, but Manon stood with him the entire time, talking to him about what it was like to ride with the 13 on their ironwood brooms and hunt down the Crochin witches. She told the stories as much to distract him as she did to remind the men that if they made a mistake, if they hurt him, her retribution would be a long, bloody process. Not one of them made an error. During the 5 days they worked on him, she missed her riding lessons with the 13, and with each passing day, the window for getting Abraxas airborne became smaller and smaller. Manon stood with Astrid and Sorel in the training hall, watching the tail end of the day's sparring session. Sorel had been working with the youngest of the coven of Blackbeaks, all of them under 70 and few of them experienced. How bad? Manon asked, crossing her arms. Sorel, small and dark-haired, crossed her arms as well. Not as bad as we feared, but they're still sorting out coven dynamics, and their leader is... Sorel frowned at a mousy-looking witch who had just been thrown to the ground by an inferior. I suggest either having her coven decide what to do with her or picking a new leader. 1 weak coven in the wing and we could lose the war games. The coven leader was panting on the hard stone floor, nose dripping blue blood. Manon ground her teeth. Give her 2 days. Let's see if she sorts herself out. No need to have word of unstable covens get around, but have Vesta take her out tonight. Vesta. Isn't... No, that's Vasa. Never mind. Manon added, glancing to the red-haired beauty leading another coven in archery drills. To wherever she's been going to torment the men in the northern fang. Sorel raised her thick brows innocently, and Manon rolled her eyes. You're a worse liar than Vesta. You think I haven't noticed those men grinning at her at all hours of the day? Or the bite marks on them? Just keep the death toll down. We have enough to worry about as it is. We don't need a mutiny from the mortals. Astrid snorted, but when Manon gave her a sidelong look, the witch kept her gaze ahead, face all too innocent. Of course, if Vesta had been bedding and bleeding the men, then Astrid had been right there with her. Neither of them had reported anything about the men tasting strange. As you will it, lady, Sorel said, a faint hint of color on her tan cheeks. If Manon was ice and Astrid was fire, then Sorel was rock. Her grandmother had told her on occasion to make Sorel her second, as ice and stone were sometimes too similar, but without Astrid's flame, without her second being able to rile up a host or rip out the throat of any challenger to Manon's dominance, Manon would not have led the 13 so successfully. Sorel was grounded enough to even them both out, the perfect third. The only ones having fun right now, Astrid said, are the green-eyed demon twins. Indeed, the midnight-haired Feline and Fanon were grinning with maniacal glee as they led 3 covens in knife-throwing exercises, using their inferiors as target practice. Manon just shook her head. Whatever worked. Whatever shook the dust off these Blackbeak warriors. And my shadows? Manon asked Astrid. How are they doing? Edda and Briar, 2 cousins that were his closest sisters, had been trained since infancy to blend into any sliver of darkness and listen, and they were nowhere to be seen in this hall, just as Manon had ordered. They'll have a report for you tonight, Astrid said. Distant cousins to Manon, the shadows bore the same moon-white hair, or they had, until they discovered 80 years ago that the silver hair was as good as a beacon and dyed it solid black. They rarely spoke, never laughed, and sometimes even Astrid herself couldn't detect them until they were at her throat. It was their sole source of amusement, sneaking up on people, though they'd never dared to do it to Manon. It was no surprise they'd taken 2 onyx wyverns. Manon eyed her second and third. I want you both in my room for the report, too. I'll have Lynn and Vesta stand watch, Astrid said. They were Manon's fallback sentries, Vesta for the disarming smiles, and Lynn because if anyone ever called her by her full name, Linnea, the name her soft-hearted mother had given her before Lynn's grandmother tore out her heart, that person wound up with missing teeth at best, a missing face at worst. Manon was about to turn away when she caught her second and third watching her. She knew the question they didn't dare ask and said, I'll be airborne with Abraxas in a week, and then we'll be flying as one. It was a lie, but they believed her anyway. The end. No, we're reading through 28. Right? 26 through... Oh, yeah, we are. We're reading through 28. Woo! Okay. How many pages is this? Yo, this one's kind of long. Oh, my God! Jesus. This is some from Blood and Ash chapters, y'all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, buckle up. It's gonna be long. Chapter 28. Days passed, and not all of them were awful. Out of nowhere, Rowan decided to take Selena to the commune of healers 15 miles away, where the... Wait. Oh, okay, never mind. Where the finest healers in the world learned, taught, and worked, situated on the border between the Fae and mortal world. They were accessible to anyone who could reach them. It was one of the few good things Maeve had done. As a child, Selena had begged her mother to bring her, but the answer had always been no, accompanied by a vague promise that they would someday take a trip to the... whatever that says, in the southern continent, where many of the teachers had been taught by the Fae. Her mother had done everything she could to keep her from Maeve's clutches. The irony of it wasn't wasted on her. If Rowan took her, she could have spent all day, all month, wandering the grounds under the clever, kind eyes of the head healer, but her time there was halved thanks to the distance and her inability to shift, and Rowan wanted to be home before nightfall. Honestly, while she'd actually enjoyed herself at the peaceful riverside compound, she wondered whether Rowan had just brought her there to make her feel bad about the life she'd fallen into. It had made her quiet on the long hike back, and he didn't give her a moment's rest. They were to set out the following dawn on an overnight trip, but he wouldn't say where. Fantastic. Already making the day's bread, Emrys only looked faintly amused as Selena hurried in, stuffed her face with food and guzzled down tea and hurried back out. Rowan was waiting by her rooms, a small pack dangling from his hands. He held it open for her. Hurried back out. Rowan was waiting by her rooms, a small pack dangling from his hands. He held it open for her. She did the same, the cool air biting her warm cheeks. "Shift, and let's go," he said, his second words to her this morning. And here I was thinking we'd become friends. He raised his brows and gestured with a hand for her to shift. "It's 20 miles, he said by way of encouragement, and gave her a wicked grin. "We're running, each way." Her knees trembled at the thought of it. Of course he'd make this into some sort of torture session. Of course. "And where are we going?" He clenched his jaw, the tattoo stretching. There was another body, a demi-fae from a neighboring fortress, dumped in the same area, same patterns. "I'm gonna go to the nearby town to question the citizens, but..." His mouth twisted to the side. Then he shook his head at some silent conversation with himself. "But I need your help. It'll be easier for the mortals to talk to you." Is that a compliment? He rolled his eyes. Perhaps yesterday's outing to the healer's compound hadn't been out of spite. Maybe he'd been trying to do something nice for her. "Shift, or it'll take us twice as long." "I can't. You know it doesn't work like that." "Don't you want to see how fast you can run?" "I can't use my other form in Ardalan anyway, so what's the point?" Which was the start of a whole massive issue she hadn't yet let herself contemplate. "The point is that you're here now, and you haven't properly tested your limits." It was true. She hadn't really seen what she was capable of. "The point is, another husk of a body was found, and I consider that to be unacceptable." Another body. From that creature. A horrible, wretched death. It was unacceptable. He gave her braid a sharp, painful tug. It's the first thing he's done that I've kind of been attracted to. Kudos to him. Unless you're still frightened. Her nostrils flared. "The only thing that frightens me is how very much I want to throttle you." More than that, she wanted to find the creature and destroy it. For those it had murdered and for what it had made her, she breathed. He didn't back down. "See what you want, Aelin, and seize it. Don't ask for it. Don't wish for it. Take it." I'm certain the average magic instructor would not recommend this to most people. You're not most people, and I think you like it that way. If it's a darker set of emotions that will help you shift on command, then that's what we'll use. There might come a day when you find that anger doesn't work, or when it's a crutch. But for now, a contemplative look. It was the common denominator those times you shifted. Anger of varying kinds. So own it. He was right, and she didn't want to think on it any more than that, or let herself get that enraged. Not when she'd been so angry for so long now. Selena took a long breath, then another. She let the anger anchor her, a knife slicing past the usual hesitation and doubt and emptiness. She brushed up against the familiar inner wall. No, a veil, shimmering with a soft light. All this time, she thought she'd been reaching down for the power, but this was more of a reach in. Not a wish, but a command. She would shift, because there was a creature prowling these lands, and it deserved to pay. With a silent growl, she punched herself through the veil, pain shooting along every inch and pore as she shifted. A fierce, challenging grin, and Rowan moved. So fast she could hardly follow as he appeared on her other side and yanked on her braid again. When she whirled, he was already gone, and she yelped as he pinched her side. Stop! He was standing in front of her now, a wild invitation in his eyes. She'd been studying the way he moved, his tricks and tells, the way he assumed she'd react. So when she crossed her arms, feigning that triumph he expected, she waited, and then he shot left to pinch or poke or hit her, and she whirled, slamming down on his arm with an elbow and whacking him upside the head with her other hand. He stopped dead and blinked a few times. She smirked at him. He bared his teeth in a feral, petrifying grin. Well, you better run now. When he lunged, she shot through the trees. I guess. She had a suspicion that Rowan was letting her get ahead for the first few minutes, because though she moved faster, she could barely adjust enough to her altered body to leap over rocks and fallen trees. He'd said they were going southwest, and that was where she went, dodging between the trees, the anger trees. He'd said they were going southwest, and that was where she went, dodging between the trees, the anger simmering around easy beneath her boots. Only instinct and reflex guiding her, telling her she could go faster still, feet eating up the loamy earth. Only instinct and reflex guiding her, telling her she could go faster still, feet eating up the loamy earth step by step. Then threw herself between two long hanging branches, mere hurdles that she landed with feline skill. Rowan was at her side again, lunging with a snap of his teeth, but she whirled and leapt over a rock, letting the moves she'd honed as an assassin blend into the instincts of her fey body. She could die for love of this speed, this surety in her bones. How had she been afraid of this body for so long? Even her soul felt looser, as if it had been locked up and buried and was only now starting to shake free. Not joy, perhaps not ever, but a glimmer of what she had been before grief had decimated her so thoroughly. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Bye, Lexi. Are you kidding me? No, I wasn't mad. I was sad because of that sentence, the not joy, perhaps not ever. She feels like she can never be happy again. And then when it said before grief had decimated her so thoroughly, I was just sad at that. No, I'm not mad that Rowan's making her happy. Say you wanna love me. Oh, the quote where she said, not joy, perhaps not ever. Am I back? Hold on. Let me not talk. Am I back? It says I'm back, but I don't think I'm back for y'all yet. I'm fearless. Okay. When she said, not joy, perhaps not ever, I was sad. That made me really sad.